Be Kraken Week. Seriously though, thanks to Jenny D and Pointy Hat for putting together Kraken Week, what is probably one of the largest, if not the largest, collaboration in YouTube history. A week packed with tips and tricks and adventure hooks and plot hooks and all sorts of ideas for seafaring adventures. Welcome to Kraken Week. I'm Brad Wolf, and this is Dire Dan. And if you're new here, one of the things I do is help you prep your campaigns, and one of the ways I do that is with building factions. And today, I'm building a Aboleth Cult faction. But before we dive into that, what is an Aboleth? The Aboleth existed before the gods. Where could they live beyond creation? How could they exist before time? That is the frightening and terrifying thing. According to the wizarding tomes, the Aboleth are individually mortal. Yet their memories are passed on with perfect clarity from one generation to the next. This flawless recollection of times before time is woven with hatred for the gods. This collective disdain for creation drives the Aboleth toward the destruction of everything the gods touched. And may I remind you that you are created in the image of the gods. The Aboleths perfectly recall all of what was and know what will inevitably replace all that is. So that's the short description of these creepy, eel-like, squid-like beings, these aberrations from beyond time. Now, they don't particularly despise humanoids, but if they ever accomplish their goal of destroying all the gods and all of creation, well, the humanoids are out of luck. But because they don't hate people specifically, it's easy for them to assemble a cult of worshippers, because they just give, psychically, they give people what they want. So you can have a creepy village that's disgusting and rotting and in ruin, but the villagers believe it's beautiful. It's an amazing place to live. And welcome, travelers. Make yourself at home in our magical place. Because the psychic ability of the Aboleth makes their followers believe that they are receiving and getting everything they want. So while everything is actually crumbling down around them, the mystified followers of the Aboleth don't see it for what it is. They see it for what they believe it to be because of the psychic power of the Aboleth. Now, I've built plenty of factions on this channel before. In fact, I've done a cult before. I did a cult of Zuckmoy, and you can check that out as well. But I wanted to challenge myself this time, so I invited some of my Dungeon Tuber friends to pitch me their ideas of what they think should be included in an Aboleth cult. And I'm going to take their ideas and work them into this cult and build stat blocks for these special monsters. And my first challenge comes from Dex Save Dan.
So what I'm thinking is something like a clam cult, where you've got a power pearl where one cultist has that. He's the big one. He's got a buff to his strength, dexterity, maybe he's got some sort of large, disgusting tongue. Now all these cultists covet that pearl, they want the power. But more than anything else, they want to keep it within the cult. So if that cultist with the pearl dies, they have a dying reaction where they can throw it with advantage to another cultist, keeping it within the cult.
Now, when I was talking to Dan off camera, he also pitched the idea that these cultists were kind of like a coven, that there were maybe 3 of these cult leaders that all hoarded this magical pearl. So here's what I'm thinking. 3 mutated mermaids who are a coven at the core of this Aboleth worshipping cult. And all 3 of them have these long slithering tongues, and maybe instead of throwing the pearl one to the other, they use these ridiculously long tongues to hand off the pearl from one long slithering tongue to the next. And again, we're playing with the stark contrast of the creepy and the beautiful. These 3 beautiful mermaids with these creepy powers and this eerie tongue and this evil magic pearl. So here's our faction chart, and we break them down into the big bad, the grunts, the brutes, the elites, and leaders. And you can extrapolate from those names the roles of the monsters that we plug into the chart. And then, of course, our Aboleth is our big bad. And because it's a cult, we're going to use the cult stat block and the cult fanatic stat block as our main grunts. And then we put our mutated Mermaid Coven into the leader's slot. And of course, to add some mystery, we have to give them a name so that when the cultists refer to their leaders, the players have no idea what exactly they are. So we're going to call this coven the Trinity. Now let's see what our next monster pitch is.
It's GM Jim from Wizards and Wordslingers, and the creature I'm going to pitch to you today is the Human Resources Cultist. Now, this creature is a support role, and it functions mainly to help the health and well-being of the other cultists. In combat, it functions like a bard. Basically, it can hand out bardic inspiration. Also, maybe it gets a couple castings of healing word per day to bring back cultists who have fallen. Out of combat, its primary job is to speak with the other cultists, to ask them how they're doing and see where they find themselves in 5 years. That's my pitch. Take care.
If you've ever worked for a large corporation, or in my case, it was a large hospital, the HR department, it's a little weird. Now, you gotta love Jim's sense of humor on this one, but imagine for a second that creepy, crumbling village full of happy and charming individuals who just want to help, just want to invest in your future and share with you all the generous gifts that they have to offer. You see how creepy that could be? That juxtaposition, that dissonance between the crumbling village and the happy villager. We're going to plug our HR cultist into an elite slot because the elites represent the monsters and NPCs who have special effects. They're either controllers, support characters, or assassin-like skirmishers. Now let's see what our next monster pitch is.
I'm Mark Seifter from Arcane Mark and Roll for Combat. My idea for an Aboleth cultist is a juvenile Kraken who is obsessed with Aboleth culture. Now, the way I think of this Kraken is that he's not actually believing in Aboleth as being divine beings, but has joined this cult because other Krakens do not like Aboleth and Aboleth culture, but these cultists are the only people who will listen to the Kraken constantly talking about how cool Aboleths are and will agree that Aboleths are awesome. So that's my idea for an Aboleth cultist.
Now, one of the creepy things about the Aboleth is they have this translucent skin, and their psychic power pulses and emanates from within their body, and it combines with this translucent skin to create this iridescent sheen, this strange, emanating, pulsing glow that shines through that creepy skin. So because our junior Kraken wants to be like the Aboleth, we're going to give it the same kind of translucent skin and some psychic powers. So its natural lightning abilities interact with its psychic abilities and give it this pulsating, flashing glow. So our junior Kraken has this cool defensive capability, something similar to the Displacer Beast ability or maybe a blur spell. So like Mark said, this Kraken doesn't worship the Aboleth, but it likes the Aboleth and kind of wants to be its friend, so it's going to be one of the leaders of our Aboleth cult. And we need a cryptic name, so our cultists are just going to refer to the Kraken as the Young One. And obviously they call it that because it's a young Kraken, but that could definitely subvert some expectations when your players are thinking Young One and then find out it's a huge creature. So even though the Kraken is a part of the cult, the Kraken's going to have some of their own followers as well. So within the faction of the Aboleth cult, we're going to start to have some sub-factions. So our Kraken needs some followers. And since this came from Mark, and Mark worked on Pathfinder 2, and Paizo is all about the goblin, so we're going to add some pirate goblins to our Aboleth cult. And of course, what are goblins without the help of some hobgoblins? So D&D has some special water-breathing hobgoblins called Holniths. The name is weird, but the art is really cool. And then, of course, our Kraken is going to have some Kraken priests, and we'll probably reflavor these Kraken priests to also be hobgoblins as well. So now we have a whole goblin sub-faction following the leadership of our junior Kraken as a part of our Aboleth cult. Now, last but certainly not least, we've got one more challenge from Cleric Corner.
What I think would make a fantastic element to an Aboleth-themed cult is the inclusion of scum creatures. Scums are an actual creature in D&D that turn into slimy, translucent beings with tentacles from the disease-bearing touch of the Aboleth themselves. They are physically bound as thralls to them. But where you have an official humanoid-sized scum, I think it would be way better if a dragon, bulette, a beholder even, or other fantastical creatures that would have been affected by the same touch. What would a Skum Dragon look like, and what would it do?
And I love the idea of scum creatures. So we're going to take a brass dragon, because why wouldn't an Aboleth corrupt a good creature and make it twisted and evil? Plus, brass dragons have a sleep breath, and I'm sure we could combine sleeping with the psychic abilities of the Aboleth and give this dragon some sort of nightmare breath. And of course, we're going to replace the dragon's wings with some sort of crazy tentacles that help it swim through the water. And I'll figure all that stuff out when I do the stat blocks for it in my next video. And make sure you subscribe if you haven't already, because that video will come out later this week. So let's return to our faction chart for the last time. And we're going to add the scum to our brutes category. And then we're going to add our deep dragon. That's what we're going to call our crazy twisted brass dragon. And we're going to give the dragon some followers, a group of Locaths, fish people. So the Locath gives us an additional grunt, the Locath hunters give us an additional brute, and then we're going to add the deep scion to finish off our elite. And there you go. We have 3 sub-factions within this bigger Aboleth Cult faction. The great thing about these sub-factions is once the players figure things out, they can play the sub-factions against each other. And of course, if you have more than one faction in your game, they can play the factions against each other. This leads to more dynamic choices for your players. So now that our cult is complete, you can plug this into any homebrew game you're using, or you could add it to other existing adventures. In fact, I recommend checking out Verdigris Table and Indestructoboy's videos this week. The 2 adventures that they discussed this week, you could easily weave this cult into. Likewise, How to RPG is totally reworking the Aboleth stat block, so go check that out too. And special thanks to Dex Save Dan, Wizards and Wordslingers, Cleric Corner, and Arcane Mark for helping me out with this video. So there's our faction chart, and the great thing about these charts is that you can mix and match the monsters into whatever encounters you need depending on the level of your player characters. So throughout the campaign, regardless of what level the player characters are, you can always find a balanced encounter by mixing and matching the monsters from this chart to meet their power level. Now in my next video coming later this week, I will build the stat blocks for these specific monsters that were recommended by my fellow creators. Until then, thanks again for visiting the Dire Den, and I'll see you next time.